So in the case of speciesism, it's humans doing this to other species. We think that they're somehow inferior and we're entitled to use them. But when you think about it, the fact that a being is not a member of the species Homo sapien is not itself a reason why we should ignore or discount their interests, their capacity to suffer, for example. And yet that's what we do all the time. So that's essentially what is wrong with the way we treat animals. We are speciesists. We don't count their interests, or we don't count them nearly as much as human interests just because they're not members of our species. That's wrong, and I think that suffering matters, whatever the species of the being that suffers. Every being is equally entitled to live the best life that it can, given its nature. When I wrote the book Animal Liberation, which first came out in 1975, there was no animal liberation or animal rights movement. There was a very small number of activists who were concerned about animals, but it's really only developed from the mid-1970s onwards that there has been a substantial political active movement campaigning for a radically different treatment for animals, not just campaigning for us to be kind to cats and dogs and horses, but really saying there is something fundamentally wrong with the attitude we have to animals, with the way we treat animals, and that needs to change. Given that we have the attitude that I mentioned, that beings who are not human don't really count, it was almost inevitable that as we developed technology, we would start to treat those animals as cogs in a machine. We think of them really as, they're a machine. We put the fuel into them, that's the grain or soybeans or whatever we feed them. They turn that into flesh or milk or eggs, and that's what we get out at the end. And they don't really matter as long as they run efficiently. And unfortunately, from a profit point of view, running efficiently doesn't mean that the animal's welfare is adequate. It means that the entire unit runs at minimal costs. And what's happened is that to reduce labour costs in particular, we've put these animals indoors. So we produce chicken in huge sheds in which there are 20,000 birds in a single shed. They're not individual animals at all. We produce eggs by having thousands of hens confined in small cages so they can't even stretch their wings. They do die in greater quantities than they would if they were living in better conditions. But from the profitability of the overall unit, it doesn't matter. The same is true when we confine pigs indoors, put cattle on feedlots. It's not about giving the animals a decent life. It's about using them as machines to churn through grain and turn it into what we want at the lowest possible cost. So the result is a massive amount of animal suffering and cruelty that is completely unnecessary. I think the greatest achievement of the animal movement over the last 40 years has been the fact that the entire European Union, that's 27 nations with 450 million people living in them, have now adopted reforms which are eliminating at least the worst of the abuses of animal farming that unfortunately we still have here in Australia. For example, the standard battery cage is being phased out. The keeping of individual sows, breeding pigs, in stalls where they can't even walk or turn around, that's being prohibited. There's a lot of reforms that will improve the lives of hundreds of millions of animals that are coming into effect in Europe. And now they're starting to spread in the United States. So about 6 states have also passed legislation to phase these out, including the state of California, which is a huge agricultural producer. So we are definitely making progress, but we need to go further, and we need that progress to happen everywhere, including, of course, Australia. I think that ceasing to purchase the products of such ruthless exploitation of animals is a basic moral step that each one of us can take to show that we don't support this abuse of animals. And that means becoming a vegetarian, or even better, a vegan, so you're not supporting these products. Now, that's going to be good for you anyway. It's a very healthy diet. It's a diet that has been shown to reduce your risks of diseases like bowel cancer, and you'll keep fit and healthy on it. You also know that in addition to not contributing to the exploitation of animals, you are minimizing your contribution to climate change, because the United Nations and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change have all said don't eat meat or eat less meat. Meat is a very heavy contributor to climate change. You're also reducing impact on the environment. You're freeing up a lot of grain and soybeans that is getting wasted by being fed to animals, because they use most of the food value just to live and breathe and keep their bodies warm, and they return to us only a small percentage of what we put into them. So it's a much more efficient diet, much more people-friendly, environment-friendly, planet-friendly, as well as much more animal-friendly. Very often with radical shifts, whether it's something like a shift away from racism or the feminist movement or the animal movement too, it takes a generational change. Some people are rather stuck in their ways and slow to change. And if young people can learn about these things, become active, become committed, they are going to eventually grow up, and society will have a completely different set of attitudes from what it had before. So that's why it's really important to have organizations involving young people, bringing young people awareness of this issue, and getting them to see that there is something you can do about it. We're not powerless. There's something every one of us can do by thinking about what is on our plate every day.